Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, Permanent Values Part 6, highlighting some more values which define the structure of Deen. These are the references, and some of the quotes which I have referred to in my presentation are taken from What is Islam? And this is our contact. Some general points in relation to permanent values. I keep adding some of these general points. The reason is that as I go through more values, some more thoughts come to my mind, and because of reading some aspects of these values, and I thought that we keep adding these because then these will provide some kind of supporting logic and reasoning for the structure of Deen. We have seen that these values are not listed as such in the Quran and required to be deduced from various verses which cover different aspects of individual and collective life. Why I put down this comment? Because this is how I felt, that these values were not apparently there when I was reading through the Quran and analyzing it, and some were obviously written by Allama Parvez in his books, but some were not there. And as such, I thought that we should bring out this point, that as we go through the Quran and look for values and say that what is stated here, does it form a permanent value or not? And if it does, because we have to look at it whether this is applicable to the first man and the last man on the planet, then that becomes a permanent value. We have to acquire a particular outlook and vision through our choice in order to identify these values from these verses, which religious minds that are merely focused on personal salvation simply cannot discern. And that is another important point for us, that over here we have to solve the problems of humanity. It is not about solving my own individual problem. The issue before us is humanity. And when we talk of humanity, then we have to look at the value, whether it is applicable to every individual on the planet or not. It means that the first change which occurs after accepting Iman is that our view about life changes. And we can judge that. It is some tangible change which takes place within us. It is not otherworldly. That previously some of the things which we could not see, through our own self-development, we start finding those aspects within the Quran. And the glaring example is of these values. Just as by becoming a doctor, one can diagnose a disease through taking a history from a patient. And we know it that if one wishes to become a good doctor, then nothing should get through the net as far as the patient is concerned. Because once they take their history, once they carry out all the diagnosis tests, they should be able to identify and prescribe some medicine or some kind of treatment for the patient so that the patient can get better. So Quran is also like that. It's a prescription consisting of permanent values and divine attributes and many other aspects through which we can solve human problems. We can not only identify human problems, but we can also solve them. We become aware of physical laws early on in life. For example, that fire provides heat and can burn. That without being able to swim, one can drown in water. That by consuming something unclean, one can fall sick. I just quoted these three examples just to draw our attention to the physical side of our existence, which we experience. However, in the domain of the functioning of the permanent values, we do not become aware of these formally, and the consequence of this is that at the self's level, we are not aware of the harm which we are accruing to ourselves as we live this finite life. This is an important point with which we should come to grips with. The reason is that in the physical world, we know that if I put my finger in fire, it will burn. In fact, the moment one brings his finger closer to fire, we will know that there is a heat over there and it will burn. But if we go against a permanent value, the burning is not immediately visible, but burning is always there, which is invisible. And that is why it is important to know these permanent values, because like our body, which gets burned through fire if our self does not follow these permanent values, and even if it is not even aware of these permanent values in the first place, then never mind whether we follow these or do not follow these, we will get affected by that, because permanent values relate to the development of our self. And if our self is not developing, just because we did not know about these permanent values, then we will be at great loss, because at self's level, it will affect our life of the hereafter as well. While sharing the finer details of these values, we should try to see them as laws relating to ourselves. And that is an important point. And that is how we should understand it, and then make our children understand it, and make everyone around us understand them. Because sometimes these things don't hit very hard. We take things very lightly in our life, particularly if we have a fairly good economic life and we are fairly well off within the man-made system. And we easily forget that there is a life which is coming to us beyond our death. And just as fire burns, if we do not take precautions, then in the same way we should consider becoming muttaqi in order to benefit from the guidance of the Quran, and to avoid the pitfalls of life which we can otherwise simply not avoid, i.e., a life lived without these values will not provide us with that self which can successfully enter the second phase of our life called the hereafter. And that is important, because sometimes when I discuss these things with others, I realize that they are not getting the gravity of the situation. They don't realize that man-made system is not the way to live life. There is a better way of living this life, and we can only live a better life if we first understand that how could we come out of the man-made system and then go over to the system of deen. And for that system of deen, we have to understand it first. Now, next list is permanent values covered in part 1 and 2. I'll quickly go over it. The human self, we covered it. Respect for humanity, or respect as a human being. The concept of Allah, ranks according to deeds, the law of requital, physical death, justice, ihsan, which is to help others to restore their balance, the existence of the life of the hereafter, the consequence of a crime, no one carries the burden of another, not to allow injustice in the world, no human being can be the subject of another one. So no human being has the right to enslave another human being. In fact, no human being should tolerate any man-made laws, because that makes them subjects of those human beings who make those laws. Obedience of the law, promote good and forbid evil, warning and admonishment is also a permanent value. So the values which were covered in part 3, 4, 5 and will be covered in today's presentation, that is part 6. The system of mutual consultation, never assign state duties to incompetent people. And this is also applicable within family as well, that if our children are not equally competent, then we should give them tasks according to their competence. The responsibility for risk is on the society. The means of risk, what is beyond your needs. Mankind is one ummah. Chastity, there is no compulsion in the matter of deen. What is good for mankind remains on earth. Reward is for the work, not the capital. And this is the state of the man-made system, in which reward is for the capital and not for the work. Good deeds replace the effects of bad deeds. Iman and Saleh deeds. No restriction to be placed on free movement of people on the planet Earth. No contradiction between word and deed. Allah's laws are immutable. The state of a people can only change when their psyche changes, and this value will be covered today. No Yateem and Miskeen in the world, and this value will be covered in today's presentation. Let us go to the first permanent value of today's presentation. The state of a people can only change when their psyche changes. And psyche over here includes every aspect of human psychology, that is, inner human thought process. Even under the man-made systems, we see the glaring display of this permanent value, where the economic, political, military, and social state of various nations directly reflects on the constitution of the psyche of their leaders and on the majority of the populations. If we apply the Quranic criteria of judging any nation, we can even highlight the misdemeanors which are contributing to their overall state of affairs. We got nearly 200 countries in the world, and we will see that each country has its own collective psyche and the psyche of their leaders. And all these leaders in today's world are not following the Quran. They are non-deen psychology they have. And that is why we see so much variation and all kinds of injustices in every country of the world. The Quran has stated this value, Inna Allaha la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Verily, never will Allah change the condition of a nation until they change it themselves. That is, with their own selves. That is, whatever is within their own self. Unless they change that, only then the external world will change. And the beauty of this verse is that Allah has related to Himself. That is, it is Allah's laws that if a nation wants to change its life, it wants to change its condition or present condition, then it must bring a change within their own self. And to bring that change within their own self, they should also understand that what is wrong with them. If one thinks that I'm doing fine, he is not going to change himself. That nation is not going to change its course of action if they think they are following the correct path. The practical visible evidence of the functioning of this permanent value is glaringly visible all around us. Yet despite this, many of those who study the Quran rarely refer to it. The question is, why is this? The Quran, from beginning to end, points to different aspects of the law of requital. That is, what we sow, so shall we reap. And we know that this law, this cause and effect thing is widely known, particularly among the educated lot. But the issue is that do they believe in it? Do they have conviction in it? And that is where the things go wrong, because they do not have conviction in it. They think what happens to others will not happen to them. And the strictness of human accountability in whatever we do individually as well as collectively. Why is there so much emphasis on individual and collective accountability, and at the same time human beings are provided with a strong sense of desires and urges? And this is another aspect which we should keep in mind and question it as well, that we have desires and urges and wishes and wish to follow our own paths in life. We wish to make our own choices. But Quran says that we are also accountable for the choices we make. And that is something which people don't realize, that the choices they are making, if those are wrong, then the results will be wrong in the long run. Next is application of this law or this permanent value. We have seen the concept of Allah which the Quran has given, according to which He has initiated those laws upon which the great system of the universe is wholeheartedly in pursuit. He has established similar laws for the human world. And we know that in the outer world there are laws functioning. For example, this earth is going around the sun and it is following Allah's law. In the human world, there is the life of the individual. These laws are applicable to both an individual's physical life and the development of his self. And in the world of science, people generally know what are the physical laws applicable in this life, but their minds seldom go towards the human self. Now, of course, the science of psychology is pointing our attention to that direction. But far more important than this is the life of nations. Though a nation is merely the name given to a collection of individuals, its psychology is unique and specific. The Quran has also given those laws according to which the rise and fall and the life and death of nations are decided. We had gone through a presentation on rise and fall of nations where we covered a number of aspects. It says that if any nation lives its life according to the laws prescribed by Allah, i.e., shapes such a system and society which is based on the divine laws, then this nation achieves great prosperity and success. And if it goes against these laws, then it is ruined and destroyed. This is called the collective law of requital, and it is absolute and immutable in the same way that the law of requital is for individuals. Next slide Continuing with the same permanent value. According to the Quran, history is a record of the functioning of this collective law of requital. In other words, it informs us that a certain nation established a certain system based on a certain ideology of life, and its fate was like this, while another nation spent its life according to another ideology, and its outcome was like that. And we are seeing clear demonstration of this, that different nations and group of nations are following different courses of life, even within the man-made systems and its relative values. In modern terminology, this is called the science of history or the philosophy of history. The presentation of history as a science or philosophy was done for the first time by the Quran. This is the reason why it accords great significance to history. So much significance that it presents history as evidence for the verification of its claims, i.e., when it says that we have declared that the nation which spends its life in this manner will be ruined and destroyed, then for the evidence in support of this claim, it asks you to look at the history of mankind and observe for yourself whether whatever nation, in whatever land, in whatever era, adopted this path, its end was ruin and destruction or not. And we see this very clearly. People normally refer to fall of the Roman Empire, but we have seen other dynasties and other empires have also gone down, and we know Ottoman Empire that existed for a long time. Nobody even talks about it. So this is what will happen to the empires or the powerful nations today. The issue before us is that who is going to replace them? And that is where the Quran comes and helps us. Two aspects for our guidance, the same permanent value. This is the reason that the Quran has expressly directed its followers to carry out a detailed study of history. So history should be taken as a science. It should be taken as something to learn lesson from. Two advantages will result from this. Firstly, evidence for the truth of the Quranic claims will become manifest to them. And secondly, they will keep checking to see that no step of theirs is being lifted in the wrong direction. So that is where history helps, that we apply these permanent values to whatever historical evidence we have and see that how these nations went against these permanent values and what happened to them. And second is to learn a lesson and then keep our path directed and always look at the consequences of following the wrong path. Hence Allah stated that we have made available two things in the Quran for your guidance. We have already sent down to you verses making things clear, an illustration from the story of people who passed away before you. In other words, on the one hand, those clear laws according to which decisions about the life and death of nations are made, and on the other hand, the circumstances and condition of previous nations. That is based on history from which the truth about these laws can be affirmed. Now, some verses of interest we will share over here. About the opponents of the Quranic system of truth and righteousness, it declares, do they not travel through the earth and see what was the end of those before them? They were more numerous than these and superior in strength, and in the traces they have left in the land, yet all that they accomplished was of no profit to them. And it's a very powerful statement of fact by the Quran that this word which we see before us, it is billions of years old. And if we think that we are the only people who have inhabited this earth, then we are sadly mistaken, because there were generations before us and they might have achieved far higher technology and in terms of advancement, but we don't see traces of them. So from Allah's point of view, there is a higher purpose of human creation, and if mankind is not meeting those creations, then their life, their stay over here is very limited and they are self-destroying themselves. So Quran is drawing our attention to our higher purpose of life and says that you should not be distracted by what is going on in the man-made world, but remain focused on these permanent values and what the Quran is asking us to do. As we have seen under the permanent value of warning, nations do get a warning about their wrong deeds. But since they do not hold themselves accountable to any law other than their own man made laws, hence their leaders and elites consider any other law worthless which could hold them accountable. Though many take the name of God to misguide themselves and those who follow them blindly. And we see that. For example, in America, people say, God bless America. And in that very statement, one can say that what about those rest of the human beings? Does God not bless them? So these are meaningless terms, phrases which are used by human beings in order to justify their wrong deeds. The Quran makes this very clear when it states, how many were the populations we utterly destroyed because of their iniquities, setting up in their places other peoples. And that is the crux of the whole matter, that each human being should know that his stay in this world is very finite and he will cease to exist after death. And has he accomplished the purpose of his life or not? And does he know what is the purpose of his creation and his life? And if he thinks that the life will end with death, then that means that's it. He has nothing in the hereafter. This takes place because we created not the heavens, the earth, and all between them merely in idle sport. That is, it's not a meaningless creation. Apparently, it looks like that. A lot of people say that who have not exposed themselves to the light of the Quran or who are not seeking guidance. They think that this whole thing is meaningless. It has no purpose. We created them not except for just ends, but most of them do not understand. And the next important point is not to waste time. In relation to this permanent value, the Quran also instructs us that if we find a non-deen system when we arrive in this world, then we should try to analyze the psyche of those who have created this man-made world. If we are born in a system of deen, then we will learn very quickly what kind of psyche mu'mineen possess. And this will be verified using the Quran as a criterion. Because within the system of deen, it will be very easy to rationally think through the purpose of life, because people will see the evidence of it right before their eyes. And in any case, if the system of deen is progressing and advancing and rest of the world is occupied or run or managed by the man-made systems, then they can very easily compare the two systems. Having become acquainted with the detrimental psyche of these people, we should not waste time in complaining about the system and waiting for it to change. And that is another important point which I thought through very carefully and put it down over here, that we waste a lot of time in discussing man-made system and its weaknesses and its limitations and its vulnerabilities. Once we have come to know that, we should waste minimum time, and it is better to discuss some permanent value of the Quran, some divine attributes which can help to develop our mind, our outlook. It will never change, as this is the verdict of the Quran. This means we should pay full attention to the system of deen and keep this in mind. And Quran has guided in number of verses. For example, in this verse, Tilka ummatun qad khalat laha ma kasabat walakum ma kasabtum wala tusaluna amma kanu ya'malun. That was the people that have passed away. They shall reap the fruit of what they did, and you what you do. On their account you will not be questioned. And it's a good way to test ourselves, that whatever we are discussing, for example, are involved in some useless conversation, we should see that will this conversation in any way help me to enhance my knowledge, my understanding. So even if we are discussing man-made system, we should look at some aspects which we are not exposed to previously or learn from some other people rather than discussing meaningless things. This verse invites us to concentrate on the guidance of the Quran and not to waste time in having false expectations from the man-made systems. Pharaoh is not likely to accept Iman, and that is another point under this permanent value. Under the direction of this permanent value, we should stop looking to the pharaohs of the world whose psyche we know in the light of the Quran. فَقَالَ أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. And this is what Pharaoh announced when he was confronted by Hazrat Musa, by the messenger Musa. Pharaoh declaring said, I am your Rabb most high. And we know Rabb is related to the means of sustenance. So he thought that he controls all the means of sustenance, which he was controlling at that point in time. They acquire power through the man-made systems and control the means of sustenance and subjugate humanity under their chains. The Quran invites us to approach it with the clear aim of acquiring power and follow its procedure as per the formula by holding firmly to the rope of Allah, and to keep reminding yourselves that this handhold will never let you down. We have gone through this aspect and it will keep coming back that Mu'mineen have to acquire power, and the formula for acquiring that power has been clearly explained in the Quran. Through the law of requital, the Quran has laid bare before us this word and the laws and scales controlling everything, be they physical or those relating to the human self and its development. Allah has made it clear that if we wish to have a better world in the near or distant future, then we need to first acquire that psyche which wishes quick results. And for that, the value applicable or the divine attribute applicable will be Ar-Rahman. And once we come to that, we will explain it in more detail. I require that lazy psyche which wishes to leave things for future generations. The choice is ours. And this is the beauty of the Quran. That Quran gives us both choices. That if we want quick results, there's the procedure given in the Quran to be followed. But if we want that it should be left over to the next generations, the future generations, then Quran also gives that recipe, and that recipe is very simple: do nothing. Now let us go to the second value of today's presentation, which is the final one as well. No Yateem and Miskeen in the world. And Yateem over here means, in a simple language, orphans, and Miskeen are those whose businesses for some reason stopped working and they have become isolated and they have become alone. They become helpless. There's more to it, and we'll explain it through their definitions. It may appear an impossibility when we view this permanent value from the direction of the man-made systems, which in fact create Yateem and Miskeen. And we can see all around us that not only they create in routine, but through wars and conflicts, they even create those Yateem and Miskeen who are also disabled, whose limbs disappear. And that is an important aspect we should keep in mind. The relative value these systems have is to minimize economic poverty, not to eliminate it. And they show little concern for the pain and anxiety which is associated with human economic, social, and psychological problems. And this is very important. We should keep in mind that even under UNO, the whole issue is to minimize poverty, not to eliminate it. Quran says it must be eliminated. When the system of deen is established, there is no Yateem and Miskeen in that system. And we will deal with that in more detail. This is all because without the guidance of Allah, human beings plan and live life at an animalistic level. And we can see plenty of examples for that. In fact, it becomes a sub-animalistic levels because animals follow their instincts. They are already guided by Allah. Whereas human beings have choice and intent. And if we fail to use our choice and intent and prefer to live life at biological level, then essentially we are worse than animals. Surah Al-Maun sets the scene for taking care of Yateem and Miskeen and links the absence of this care to the falsifying of deen. And Quran says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَىٰ طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. See you one who falsifies deen, the one who repulses the Yateem, that is, who pushes back the Yateem, the orphans, and encourages not the feeding of the Miskeen. And feeding over here can be taken as helping someone with a view to help them to establish their systems, their businesses, their means of living. Why does the Quran place this intense emphasis on this aspect and ask the Mu'mineen to make it the goal of their life and to establish the system of Salat and Zakat with a view to taking care of the whole of humanity? And if we go to verse 177, that is the Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 177, we will see that after asking us or drawing our attention to helping others, that is our relations and those who are stranded and Yateem and Miskeen, then Quran says, Aqimus salata wa atuz zakata. that this has to be done through the system. Initially, of course, we do it individually. Then once the system is established, then it becomes a system of salat and zakat. For this reason, Allah has declared himself to be Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And we have gone through this aspect in chapter 1, that is Surah Al-Fatiha. It's worth going through it again. And Rabb over here means that the responsibility for rububiyat, responsibility for providing means of sustenance and rizq is on Allah for whole of humanity, for all times. But in the case of human beings, Allah has provided all the means. It is human beings who carry out the distribution of these means. Because the distribution of these means is related to human self-development. If Allah had to do it himself, then there was no need to create human beings. It is the duty of Allah as Rabb that since He has created human beings with a physical body plus a self, and a self which has choice and intent, that arrangements are made for their sustenance, nourishment, and development through a system. Now, let us go through these definitions of Yateem and Miskeen. First comes Yateem, and the root is given here. It means to be alone or left alone is its basic meaning. According to Raghib, every one of those things which is unique and alone is called Yateem. A child without a father is also called Yateem as he becomes lonely. That woman is also called Yateem as per Lisanul Arab who does not have a husband, i.e. either he is dead or not present. In the Quran, the term Yatam and Nisa has appeared for such women. Yatim, Yatman means to become weak and feeble, become dependent and fatigued, to become destitute. It also appears in the meanings of anxiety and sorrow. And that is the beauty of it, that Yateem does not only mean economically deprived or dependent, but it also includes that anxiety, sorrow, grief which is caused by being Yateem, being left alone, being dependent on others. The Quran declared the cause for destruction of the capitalist system as La tukrimun al yatim. It's worth going through these verses before 17 and after it, because there is a lot mentioned by the Quran in these verses. Those who are left isolated in society are not taken care of. And tukrimin, we know that Quran says, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, that the best among you are those who are the most righteous. So over here, Quran is drawing our attention to the inherent respect and dignity of human beings. And that is why Quran says, Laqad karamna bani Adama, that there is an inbuilt respect and dignity in every human child. And the societies which fail to do this gradually decline and then disappear. Hence, in a society in which any human being develops this feeling and sense that he is isolated, no one is there to help him, his problem is his alone, that society is on the path of destruction. Let us go to some more aspect. Next term is Miskeen, and the root is given over here. The meaning of sukoon is not to move, to become static. Raghib has stated that it is something coming to a standstill after movement. This word is also used for making some place home. Miskeen is he whose movement is diminished due to poverty and dependence. It is also used for someone who is humiliated and weak. For example, in this verse of Surah Al-Kahf, Al-Safinatu Fakanat le Masakin. The boat belonged to the Miskeen, that is weak, against the tyranny of the king. And this is an interesting story which is between the messenger Musa and another righteous man. There are three events which take place. It's worth going through these verses in our own time. It is also used for the condition of poverty and humiliation and feebleness and deprivation. And for more details, we can look at Lughatul Quran. In verse, for example, this one, Innama sadaqatu le fuqara wal masakin. The alms are only for the poor and the needy. Miskeen is he whose running business comes to a halt or due to some accident he is unable to partake in the struggle of life. So the Quran has put a lot of emphasis on this, that initially when the system is not fully established, then individuals have to carry out these duties. But ideally, this should also be organized by the system of deen till it matures into a system. Under the system of deen, no one can remain deprived of the needs of life. Because if one is deprived of needs of life and all the time worrying about his bread and butter, then he is not going to think on wider issues of life. His intellectual abilities will not be fully alive, will be fully available to him. The system will have arrangements in place to identify and recognize such human beings, and efforts will be in place so that their self-respect and dignity is never compromised. The aspects which we are going through now are equally applicable in our families. We should ensure that our children don't feel yateem and miskeen. Of course, we don't have to spoil them, but they should understand their responsibilities. At the same time, we should understand their emotive side, their intellectual side, as well as their physical side. Next slide, continuing on the same value. We should not look at this permanent value mechanically, where some kind of welfare allowance is handed over to them, that is yateem and miskeen, to meet their economic needs and then to forget about it. This is not the desire of the Quran. Quran wants to deal with every human being as a whole, as one unit, one complete unit, just like each one of us who is managing the affairs of the system of deen. This value needs to be linked to other permanent values in order to come up with a comprehensive strategy predicated on meeting the physical needs and the needs of the self. All human beings have some level of empathy and sympathy towards fellow beings. And we know it, we all have some empathy and sympathy. But this empathy and sympathy under relative values is different than this empathy and sympathy under the domain of the permanent values. And obviously under the domain of permanent values, we have to increase it, we have to develop it, we have to take it to a very high level of eminence and loftiness. For example, a biological affinity, nationalistic sentiments, social relations, etc. However, under the man-made systems, these are influenced by relative values and confined to emotive reactions. I'll just give you an example on biological affinity. Because parents have love and affection towards their children, they will also have some empathy and sympathy. The issue over here is the same parents, do they have the same empathy and sympathy towards any child in the world who is just like their own children? And that is something which we have to think through. The same human beings who are very kind toward their own family, friends, and colleagues also become complicit in destroying lives through conflicts, wars, and various criminal activities. And we see that all these people who are letting loose this tyranny and cruelty towards fellow human beings, they look after their families very much. They have sympathy and empathy towards their own children, towards their own friends, and towards their own countrymen. Why do they do it to others? Because they do not consider others to be equal with them. They cannot feel the pain of that. And this is what Quran does, because Allah is Rabbul Alameen. He is Rabb of every human being. And that point we should write engrave into our mind for all times, that this is the responsibility of mu'mineen who are being educated and trained in these value systems. We are witnessing horrific brutalities in Gaza, Ukraine, Libya, Syria, Kashmir, and you name it, in every part of the world and other regions of the world on a continual basis. And we should go to the past as well. All those who comprise the elites have families and friends and are also supported by many among the general populace. The question is, why is this the case? And that is the important point we have to come to terms with. Why do other human beings do it? And if we grasp it properly, what the Quran is telling us, then we can figure it out, that why the system of deen is required, why Quran is appealing to Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen. The reason for all this is only one: denial of the law of requital and the assumption that life ends with the physical death. If human beings hold themselves accountable, then they are not going to do it. But the accountability is very much confined to within the nation states. That if that nation in which those leaders are is holding them accountable, then they are likely to not do it. But if the nation is also complicit in these crimes, then we will exactly see what is happening in the world of what has happened in the world of 2024 and will continue to take place in the world of 2025. Now, over here, what I've done is one complete Surah Ad-Duha I have quoted over here because I never looked at it previously in that way. But in the pursuit of explaining this permanent value, I looked at it again, and it is an amazing Surah. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَىٰ مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَىٰ وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَىٰ وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَىٰ أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَىٰ وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَىٰ وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَىٰ فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. The delay which is taking place in the ultimate success of this revolution from this, O Rasool, these kinds of thoughts are arising in your heart that maybe I have made some error of judgment due to which my Rabb has given up on me and has become dismayed with me. This is not at all the case. This is beautifully explained by Allama Parvez in view of the rest of the Quran, that while the revelation was being sent to the messenger, that is Rasulullah, there was a pause in that wahi at some stage, and this wahi, this surah, was revealed in response to that. But what it does is it is putting a complete procedure of proceeding towards the system of deen within these 11 verses. And it starts from a beautiful metaphor. Do you not observe that before the appearance of light at daybreak, how the darkness of the night creates silence and quietness in everything by wrapping it all within itself? And how long this duration of quietness and darkness is. These realities are witnesses on this, that. So what the Quran is saying is that after the night, when the daybreak comes, and while we are in the night, we think that this night is not going to be over. This darkness is not going to go away. But day does arrive with the rising of the sun. And then the Quran explains to the next verses, these initial phases of your program will be extremely challenging and requiring courage. That these will appear very dark. You will see that I can't see and find my path. But gradually, as we move forward, as you will move forward, you will see that things are getting into their proper place and the things are materializing. The seed is now growing. But ultimately, they will prove to be the cause for every kind of good and blessing for you. And it will not be long before the law of Rububiyyat of your Rabb will bestow so much on you that all your wishes will become fulfilled. And that is the beauty of it, that as you will progress through this program of yours or the program of Allah, you will see that things will start materializing in the right direction. In this regard, O Rasool, just reflect on your own life. Is it not a fact that you were left alone and destitute? And the word yateem is used over there in this verse. And Allah created the means for protection and refuge for you. And this is the beauty of this surah, that Allah is firstly directing the attention of the messenger to his own self. And over here we can also pause and see that despite being the beneficiaries of the man-made system, how we are working on this system for the larger good of mankind. Then is it also not a fact that you are wandering around bewildered in search of reality of life, and he guided you towards the correct path of life through wahi? And this is where the next permanent value will come, and we will discuss that guidance only comes to those who are seeking it. And this is an extremely important point, that if we are not seeking guidance from the Quran, despite reading it day and night, we will still not get guidance from the Quran. And in this case, Quran makes it very clear about the Messenger of Allah that he was also looking for guidance, only then he got it. And if we go to Surah Taha, we will see that in that This aspect is also glaringly visible in the case of the messenger Musa as well. And is it also not a fact that Allah found you needy and gave you so much due to which you no longer remain dependent on anyone? And over here, Quran is drawing attention of the messenger to this fact that economically being sound is very important for progressing on the path of deen. Next is continuing with the same surah, Ad-Duha. Have you seen how after every difficult phase in your life, the aspect of openness and ease appears? The same will occur in the case of your revolutionary invitation. Now the Quran is coming to the crux of it. Hence, keep treading on this program with steadfastness and determination so that such a situation is created within society that whichever individual is left alone without help, that is becomes yateem, no one can suppress him and push him away. See how Quran has taken the messenger from his own position of yateem now to the wider issue within the mankind. And that no one who is needy is viewed as being so despicable that the denunciations of those who are wealthy make him reach the stage of a feeling of being worthy of contempt. Due to this demeaning treatment of theirs, he develops an aversion for his own self. And this is a beautiful thing to which the Quran has drawn our attention, that the people who are wealthy and have set up these charities just to make beggars out of other fellow human beings are not working for the system of deen because they do not wish to give up their own wealth. And that is where the Quran is now hitting hard and telling the messenger, don't get distracted by these elite and wealthy people. For this aim, that such a transformation should take place within society, keep spreading this word widely, that whatever means of conveniences and bounties Allah has created for life, they are not for this purpose, that one class should usurp these and hoard them, while humanity at large becomes deprived of them. The doors to these should remain open equally for every needy one. This is the first and extremely important link of this program. Now next is a few more reflections on this permanent value. We come across comments like this, that if there is a God, why does he not do something about these human beings who are poor, destitute, deprived, exploited, victims of various wars and crimes? And these kind of thoughts do come to the minds of those who have come to the Quran as well. And Quran answers this very in detail. This kind of thinking, whether expressed openly or concealed under the veil of the religious concept of Qismat, promotes criminality across the world. In fact, those people who express these kind of opinions, if we give them a message of the Quran, they will never come to the Quran. And I have done it because they don't want to take any responsibility for them. But they never attribute it to God, that once they have become rich because of the man-made system, they never say what kind of a God he is who is given us far more than these poor people. They will never say that. When a human being, despite witnessing injustices across the world, fails to question the causes and does not make an effort to counter these by thinking about any solutions, he is not employing his intellect and reasoning potentials. This is what animals do. Animals don't think and don't solve problems, and they don't even create problems. The same people never question their deity who gives in abundance to them but ignores the majority. The Quran awakens us to the one-way street of life, which we are bound to live, and appeals to our consciousness regarding our cognitive makeup. Every thought which arises and will arise in our heart and mind has been taken into account by Allah at the time of the creation of man. And just see that how powerful human mind is, how powerful are latent potentials kept within man, and how much injustice we do to ourselves if we do not use the Quran to bring out our best right in this world before we die. It describes the two states of human existence, what it will be like before the acceptance of guidance and what it will transform into after the acceptance of guidance. If a self simply does not recognize the state of those fellow human beings who are left behind even under the man-made systems and cannot figure out that this is due to the unjust systems, then such human beings never rise to the stature of humanity. Next slide is continuing with a few more issues. The Quran links the existence of uncertainty, fear, and evil to the issue of the presence of Yateem and Miskeen in any society in the world. This means that Allah is fully aware of the feelings and thoughts of human beings who suffer at the hands of the man-made systems. Over here, we should pause and reflect that all these pains and miseries and anxieties which human beings are suffering across the world, Allah is fully aware of it because He has created it, and He has kept this kind of cognitive dissonances within us, to which He has pointed our attention in this book, and then invites us to deal with it, solve these, so that we develop ourselves and are able to get Allah's help to establish this system. But at the same time, Allah also waits for Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen to form, gain strength, rise and do something about it on His behalf. And there is another verse which Quran says, Yufuna bin nazre wa yakhafuna yawman kana sharruhu mustatira. They perform their vows and they fear a day whose evil flies far and wide. And over here, vows means that they make a determination. They are not happy with the Taghuti system in the world. They reject that system, and they know that if they did not do anything to counter this system, then a stage will come when evil will fly everywhere. And we can see plenty of it at present because of what is going on in the world. Even if we are the beneficiary of this system, when the news of misery from Gaza, Ukraine, Kashmir, Syria, Libya, even Vietnam in the past, all these human beings who are suffering across the world comes to us, it does destroy our peace. It does give us anxiety. Then it states, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. And they feed for the love of Allah, miskin, yatim, and the captive. And over here, this is the beautiful term, hubbehi, that if you claim to have love and affection for Allah as the religious people claim, then are you doing something about it? Are you working for the system of deen after recognizing them? Or instead of doing something for them, you go over to Hajj and Umrahs and spend millions over there? Points to the change in psyche. Innama nutimukum liwajhillahi la nuridu minkum jazam wala shukura. They say, we feed you for the sake of Allah, nor do we desire from you any reward nor thanks. There is a beauty over here, and there is a very important point implicit in this verse, that when they say that we don't want this, they also mean that we want a system in which this situation is not there even in the first place. They feel very uncomfortable that equal human beings, because of the man-made system, are asking for help, are in need of help. And they feel terrible for these human beings, and they want that we want to bring change to this system. And in order to bring change to this system, they seek for Allah's guidance, just like the Messenger of Allah, and then they work on this program together with those who are also on this program. And that is where Tolu Islam comes into it. The Tolu Islam is the sole organization, movement in the world which is working towards the system of deen. The aim of deen is, Inna nakhafu min Rabbina yawman abusan kamtarira. We only fear a day of distasteful wrath from the side of our Rabb. Because if Rububiyat is not being followed in the world, then the system, the man-made systems will always head for disasters, some kind of a big war or destruction. System evolves over a period of time, and obviously this doesn't happen overnight. It evolves very gradually from the man-made system towards the system of deen. To counter the evil proclivities of the man-made systems, those who rise up on this path of deen resort to this, allazina hum ala salatihim daimun, those who remain steadfast in their salat, very clearly pointing towards the system of salat. And that is where Aqimus Salata is understood. As a result of this salat, what happens is, وَالَّذِينَ فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ مَعْلُومٌ, and those in whose possessions is a recognized right. And of course, If we derive and expand this verse a bit further, under the system of deen, everyone has a right to adequate means of sustenance. This means they recognize the state of the unjust system which produces human beings in a state of deprivation and destitution. And Quran says, Lissaile wal mahroom. For the needy who asks and him who is prevented are aspect of feeling. So in a system of deen, in the system of deen, people don't wait that somebody will come to them. The system is so inviting that it wants them to come and seek help so that they can stand on their own feet. Over here, we should remember that the system, under this system, people are motivated to make use of their hands and feet and their body and their intellect in order to do work so that they can justify their existence. Work is important for their own self-development. And once human beings are convinced that this work which I am doing will make me successful in this life, my needs will be met, and I will also have a better life in the hereafter, then people will be motivated in their own self-interest to work for it. The important aspect to note here is that the Quran is not only pointing to the physical state of these human beings, but is also inviting us to recognize the feelings and sentiments of despair and humiliation which these man-made systems create. Hence, it is not about just meeting the physical needs, but about looking at the negative thinking which becomes created due to these states. No man-made system can even think of this. And this is where the Saleh deeds come in. This is where we are trying to bring out our latent potentials in the interest of the system of deen and trying to figure out how other human beings feel when they are down and trodden. The next verse takes us to new heights in relation to the need for the system of deen, and it says, وَالَّذِينَ يُصَدِّقُونَ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ, and those who thus prove the truth of the existence of the day of deen, and which is normally translated as judgment. Now, final remarks on this permanent value. Through this value, our finer latent potentials as human beings become firstly identified, and then through action we manifest that eminence which is meant to be displayed as part of the Iman plus Saleh deeds combination. This is that characteristic which Allah has placed within our reach. Through the acquisition and development of this trait, we move away from merely seeing others through their appearance, dress, gender, worldly status, material possessions, nationality, power. We don't see other human beings as an embodiment of a physical beings, but we look at their intellectual side, we look at their self, we look at their feelings, their sense of vulnerability because of the bad system, and acquire the ability to view them as human beings who possess all these latent potentials and thus become intrinsically deserving of respect and dignity. We should never ever judge people from their appearances, from their color, their race, their nationalities, what power they have, status they have. We should look at them from self's point of view, whether those are rich or poor, because these rich and poor are relative values which the man-made system puts on them, other human beings. And this is the cause for their degradation as human beings. When this kind of outlook and vision is acquired by ourselves, then we come to understand these verses which relate to those human beings who are left alone under all man-made systems without any exception. Hence, we should bear in mind that when a sense of being left out and abandoned arises in a human being, and he simply cannot share it with anyone because he perceives that there is none there to hear his problems, then he becomes Yateem and Miskeen. This is more than being deprived of the physical means of sustenance. In the light of what we have covered today, we should ask a question of ourselves: can I now recognize and empathize with the condition of another human being across the world who feels alone and abandoned? For example, the suffering of human beings in war-torn regions or in slums created by rich and elite. And last slide, which I added later on, just to remind ourselves, I thought to share some photographs which we have seen before as well. Here is a child who was born like any other child anywhere in the world, and he is Yateem and Miskeen. And then there is another old man seeking human kindness. And we can see all kind of misery written on his face. And he has a self like this child has a self. And there's another one who is probably looking for a job on the side curb. And we see these kind of people in underdeveloped world. And over here, there's the cartoon. I thought it speaks volumes about the state of the world of 2025. Calculate and donate your zakat this Ramadan. So this business is only for 1 month. These people are not pushed about what happens in the rest of the 11 months. And 2.5%, we know all about it because the Quran says what is beyond your need. And when you tell them that value, they look at you very surprisingly. And this is another way of humiliating people, that a rich man standing over here and dishing out some kind of a charity, and there are human beings standing in a queue to get some help. And these are the ones who are created by man-made system. We have seen plenty of it in our lifetime. And these are the bodies which are these siblings carrying around to bury them for no fault of theirs, except that there is no Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen in the world. And there are not many who recognize that they are Yateem and Miskeen. All of them are Yateem and Miskeen. All of them are Yateem and Miskeen. All of these are Yateem and Miskeen. And the Quran says, وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَٰذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا وَاجْعَل لَّنَا مِن لَّدُنكَ وَلِيًّا وَاجْعَل لَّنَا مِن لَّدُنكَ نَصِيرًا. And people read these verses day and night through the Quran, but you will never ever see these people even mentioning it. And why should you not fight in the cause of Allah? And remember, this is what Allah is saying. Allah is addressing the mankind. Allah is addressing Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen. Of course, now there is no Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen in the world, so these verses are being addressed in the vacuum. And of those who, being weak, are ill-treated, men, women, and children, whose cry is, Our Rabb, rescue us from this town, whose people are oppressors, raise for us from you one who will help. So the Quran is asking all mankind that do you wish to work for Allah? Because in your world will only change when you will change. And you should change within the domain of the permanent values of the Quran. Thank you for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen. Thank you.